Hello, everyone. Good evening. If you are in India, if you're outside of India, good morning or good afternoon, most likely. Welcome to our second ScrollStack Academy MasterClass. Last week, we had a MasterClass, which was our first one ever on creative writing. Arunava Sinha shared some fantastic tips and tricks and sort of learnings on how to start writing, how to become a better writer, and all things. So if you haven't checked it out, please go and check that one out if you're interested in that. Today is our second ScrollStack Academy Masterclass on podcasts, essentially all things related to podcasts. So before we jump into that, let me just for the folks who are attending this for the first time, who weren't here last time, or who are not existing ScrollStack creators, I'll give a quick overview of what ScrollStack is, the problem that we are trying to solve, and what we are doing with ScrollStack Academy. So ScrollStack, which you can find on scrollstack.com, is a free creator platform to make sure that all kinds of creators, whether you write, whether you talk, whether you shoot, whether you create different forms of art, it's a platform for you to actually create a home for your best work. This could be articles, this could be podcasts, this could be a mix of things. So you can actually create a post that has a little bit of video, a little bit of text, a little bit of audio, some pictures. You can do all kinds of things. We don't believe in limiting creativity into one specific form. It is completely free to everybody. And the other part is there are payments integrated. We are also of the belief that ad supported internet is actually not the future. A lot of your followers or to be followers will be ready to pay you for things that you create or to support the work that you create. So we have created a platform that gives you the creative freedom to create in any format that you want, in any language that you want. So it's also a platform that's built for multilingual, for all Indian languages and some of the global languages from ground up. And it has payments integrated so that you can charge your followers as well. So please go and check it out if you're not already on ScrollStack. ScrollStack Academy is actually our initiative to make sure that creators who are on ScrollStack, but also creators around India and around the world as well, get to be better at things that they want to be better at. So that could be writing, that could be audio, that could be podcast, that could be business writing, all how to write Hindi fiction. A lot of different topics are there that we are going to run master classes on. So ScrollStack Academy is actually a community initiative to make sure that while we are building the platform, we are also building a very tight knit global community of creators who are coming together to help each other out, like it should be in the world. With that, I am really excited to present our second ScrollStack Masterclass today with Karthik on podcast. So Karthik runs the Filter Koffee podcast. If you haven't checked it out, please go and check it out. It is not an interview of people. It is actually a long form, anywhere hour to hour plus conversations on a very diverse range of topics. Like it could be brand Kerala in terms of how Kerala is perceived with somebody like Manu Pillai, to the crisis that India faces on blood donations and blood shortage and how that's being solved, to topics like how divorce is and should be normal today. So Karthik covers a very wide variety of topics, has great in-depth conversations. If you are looking to sort of learn the art and craft of podcasting, highly recommend you guys go and check out Karthik's podcast. But that is not Karthik's day job. Karthik is also the chief content officer at Wavemaker. Before he started that, he actually set up the social media practice for Group M, which is a big advertising agency. And he was also the head of a joint venture between Nielsen and McKinsey that focused on digital insights. And Karthik also is a faculty at a lot of prestigious business schools around India. So he wears many hats on his day-to-day, week-to-week journey. So he's here today to sort of talk about podcasting and how he goes about it, and he has a lot to share. So with further ado, I'll hand the floor off to Karthik. Karthik, all yours. And at the end of the session, by the way, we will have time for Q&A. So wherever you are following this broadcast, in the comment section, you can ask your questions. We will see all of them. I will collate them, and then when it's time for Q&A, around 30 to 40 minutes in, we'll start to go through the questions one by one. We had a pretty good record last time answering all the questions, so we'll see if we can make that happen today as well. So with that, Karthik, over to you.
Thank you so much. I hope all of you can hear me very well. I don't really care if you can't see me much. Thank you for the lovely introduction. If you're interested in this show, it is the Filter Coffee podcast. Coffee spelled with a K, of course. I know Arunava is a very difficult first act to follow, but I'll try my best. Mostly because this is a topic that is closest to my heart. I'm just going to quickly share my screen. Give me a moment. I hope you can see my screen. Right. Okay, cool. So, what can you expect in the next 30 to 35 minutes? Largely, I tried to some sort of put a history around podcasting in the world and especially in India, and then sort of go into um, probably bucketing podcasts into different kinds, right? Because it's important to understand what is the content that is out there and who are creating it. And then I've also sort of tried to package my own journey and the learnings that I have derived from this, right? So I'll move through this as quickly as I can, and really look forward to the Q&A section at the end of it, right? Um, Okay, if you really look at the history of podcasting, of course, we need to start off by talking about the name itself, um, which, of course, is a combination of what happened at a device level with the iPod, and of course, what is happening with the content, which is broadcasting. Um, Incidentally, when I started looking for, okay, when did we start using this term for the first time, right? Then I landed up on this 2004 article by a BBC journalist called Ben Hammersley, who it's a very interesting article where he talks about the audio revolution, which must have been quite a thing to do in 2004, um, a year after or a couple of years after Gmail was launched, right? So where he talks about audio blogging, podcasting, should we call it guerrilla media, etc. I'm really happy he didn't call it guerrilla media, right? Um, but if you really look at the timeline of what happened with podcasting, in fact, the name that I would prefer for this is stock radio, because that's what it is. Um, I think it's in the 1980s when the digital distribution of talk radio actually happens, right? And this happens in many places in the United States at that point. Um, and it's being shared across networks in a not so very aesthetic form, but still fairly effective. And it's important to note that people started sharing, audio content on the internet even before music started happening, right? And then I think the big watershed moment, the first watershed moment, I think is in 2000 when i2go launches episodic content on their MP3 players. Of course, this is a device that dates the iPod and many other devices that came after that. But to me, I think the most important piece, the technology that still makes podcasting, the democratic thing that it is today, is the attaching files in an RSS feed, right, which was implemented by its founder, Adam Weiner, in 2000. And then 2004, like we saw earlier, the term podcasting sort of begins. And 2005, as we all know, is really the most critical moment when we hit scale, which is iTunes starting to support podcasts, and in 2006, Jobs actually demoing it, in his keynote address. Interestingly, the same year, George Bush Jr., of course, also became the first president to deliver his address as a pod. And it's a very interesting one if you can get a hold of it. In India, the journey starts actually much earlier than you probably imagined, which is in 2006, when an organization called Indicast, one of the first podcasting initiatives in India, was launched. Right? And then 2013, of course, Apple announces 1 billion podcast subscribers, which of course is a number that has increased significantly since. And commercially speaking, I think 2019 and what's happening with, or rather what happened with Gimlet, really gave it the commercial stamp, right? That this is an industry to reckon with. This industry has the revenues to reckon with. And I don't know how many of you follow the news, but there's also talks of another big acquisition in this space, with Wondery being potentially acquired by Amazon. Right? So that's sort of the history of podcasting in India. If you ask me what makes it unique, right? I think it is um, there's audio content everywhere around us, right? But what makes this format sort of unique, it's like I said, it is talk radio, which I think is the most apt definition for it. And the fact that it is theme led, right? Every conversation, the millions of podcasts that are doing the rounds today, it's beautiful how everyone has a particular theme. And the fact that we're able to create episodic content around it, which is very unique, right, when you compare it with other forms of content out there. And the fact that it is an open source distribution across platforms, right? Unless it is a Savan exclusive or a Spotify original. The way podcast is structured technically is that there is a feed, and every major platform sort of dips into that feed, right? And that is democratic in nature. Right? In that sense, I think I spoke about theme, and it's important to note that one of the earliest sports podcasts, was the Patriots Unfiltered. Right? It's a thing that continues even today, but it's stunning that it's been around even 20 years back. Right? Um, to me, if you go to the listening experience of podcasts, I think that is what is probably the novelty, right, when it comes to someone who's sampling this medium for the first time. Right? To me, podcasts are probably the most intimate storytelling medium that exists today. There's something about the simplicity of audio, and probably safe to say that most of us listen to podcasts um, probably using our earphones, or probably in a car when there is no other large sound that is happening. Right? And that actually gives it a very, very intimate experience. Right? Um, where you can hear the person breathe, hear the person's anger, hear the person's laughter. Right? It's a beautiful sensory experience. It's beautiful because it's more of a lean back sort of a medium, as against video, which is more of a lean forward medium, isn't it? And podcast helps build communities, whether it is fitness or wellness, or whether it is money, or whether it is coffee, for that matter. Right? Uh, Podcast helps build communities without having to worry about the size of it. Niche communities, large communities, all of them. Right? And the the convenience of podcast is also what makes it very interesting. Right? You can do this while you are listening to something else, while you're doing something, while you're traveling somewhere, right? And you're always, I think the truth of it is, you're always more informed at the end of it than you were at the beginning. Right? Quickly moving on to the podcasting scene in India. Um, I've always felt that India is a audio first country, right? Um, for multiple reasons, right? The way generations and centuries and thousands of years of storytelling, the way it has happened in this country, has always been through largely an audio medium. If you take the urban lifestyle, it is very, very conducive to a medium of storytelling that helps you multitask. Right? The long traffic jams, the long commutes that we take, the walks and the runs that we do, in our urban life. All of that sort of augurs well for an audio medium. Right? And of course, needless to say, the way mobile will penetrate this country will largely be through feature phones, right? At least for now. And podcast becomes or rather audio becomes a great form factor for us to listen to it, right? Whether it is feature phones or whether it is the entry level smartphones, right? So I always felt that the promise of audio is much more than what it is being leveraged right now. And there is a reason why it is under leveraged in India as well, right? I think largely in the late 90s, when we sort of commercialized FM, late 90s, early 2000s, and we sort of commercialized FM, the regulatory piece of it ensured that only large media companies could control it, could actually run an FM station, right? And I think everybody sort of decided on the greatest common denominator of content, which is film music, right? So for the longest time, for decades actually in this country, we've been starved of variety when it comes to audio content. And it is this regulatory nature that makes only a handful of FM channels possible to exist in a city, right? For 5 or 10 or 15 at best in most cities in India. Whereas you compare this to a city like in New York or a city like Boston, where there are hundreds, 500, 600 FM channels at any given point. Right? I think that's a fundamental difference, which is also why I think the audio revolution is happening later in India. It's also why we probably will be more fascinated about it, and it will happen quicker than in other countries. Okay, let me cut to your story, right? Our story in terms of what we want to do. And for that, I want to break down podcasts by way of the different people who sort of create it. Right? To me, I think the most common way of creating a podcast, even in terms of numbers, are usually done by networkers, right? People who have access to a variety of guests, and people who are able to hold a conversation, right? I think this is probably the most popular kind of podcast in the world. To me, my biggest inspiration in audio content overall is a show called Fresh Air, which is part of the NPR network in the US. It's hosted by a lady who's a phenomenon called Terry Gross. And if you're interested in this, you should read a book which is goes by the name "All I Did Was Ask." Terry's show is actually, has been around since the late 70s, and it continues even today. And Terry's network, includes heads of state, heads of countries, musicians, artists, scientists, astronauts, everybody. Right. In a similar way, another show that I absolutely love internationally is How I Built This, a show hosted by a gentleman called Guy Raz, who speaks to entrepreneurs about their story. Right? And these are not entrepreneurs who are starting up today, but these are the most successful entrepreneurs in the world, right? From Richard Branson to the founder of Cisco to the founder of Ben and Jerry's, so on and so forth. In India, my own show will probably can be pigeonholed as a networker show, because I host guests who are artists, who are culture commentators, who are journalists, who are authors, who are activists, who are entrepreneurs, right? If you go to another show like Advertising is Dead, hosted by my very good friend Varun, it's all about marketing, right? And my favorite podcast of India is Amit Verma's Seen and the Unseen, right? Where he speaks to authors, mostly, but I think his network is wider and extremely richer. Right? The other kind of podcast is where expertise comes into play. Okay? People who know a subject really, really well, and they're able to build an entire show around it. Globally, the kind of shows that are clicked almost instantaneously in every market it has been launched are shows around money. Right? Planet Money is a big hit in the US. In India, we have a show called Paisa Vaisa, which is very, very useful. If you're losing sleep about investments and money and savings, etc. My personal favorite over the last few years has been Malcolm Gladwell's Revisionist History, where he's a historian, he's a writer, so he goes back to the moment in history and then looks at what actually transpired and how we probably in most cases remember an event wrongly. Right? In India as well, you will see a lot of shows around wellness and fitness done mostly by people who are experts in the space. Right? If you move on to the next side of it, storytellers and creators, right? I think the biggest shift in podcast listening globally happened when Serial was launched internationally. Right? It's a story about a true incident that happened, and it's a story which actually involved conversations with the protagonists of that incident, people who were involved in that incident. And it just opened the floodgates. Right? Millions of people started listening to podcasts because of that show. In India, very underleveraged. We don't do fiction very well, and we don't produce fiction very well. But there are some great examples. As we speak today, one of the most listened to shows in India is actually a show in Tamil. It's called Ponniyin Selvan, um, um, which actually is a colloquial narration of a classic literature piece. The other part, of course, which is some of the biggest shows are made of this, are when journalists and opinion makers sort of host shows. Right? My most favorite, or rather the show that I listen to the most today, multiple times a week, is Pivot, which is Kara Swisher, who's a journalist. She talks about the internet economy, and she's joined by Professor Galloway. And between them, they sort of break down everything that happens in the world of the internet twice a week. Right? Great perspective. In India, very few successful large-scale shows are hosted by journalists. Right? I think this is still an open play field for us. And of course, entertainers, comedy, rappers, culture commentators. Cyrus's shows is a force to reckon with in India. And some of you might not know this. All India Buck Shows actually started off as a podcast first, right, before it became a cultural phenomenon. Quickly shifting to the most important question, right? Is podcasting for you? What are the questions you should ask yourself if you're contemplating hosting a podcast? Right? I think you'll have to be a lover of depth over breadth, right? An issue, an area, a particular style, for you to be able to go back to that week on week and spend hours in conversation definitely needs a certain love for depth, right? I think you should also, if you are the kind of person who would like to impact the discourse, right? It could be around activism, it could be around politics, could be around money, could be around love. But if you enjoy impacting a discourse, podcasts are definitely for you. If you have the discipline to create, which is the most understated input, to a successful show, podcasts are definitely for you, because to be able to set time aside, to be able to create week on week on week, it needs a great level of creativity, but coupled with great discipline. Right? And if you are planning to host a show which is a conversational in nature, you absolutely need to be a great listener. You need to have a lot of patience. You need to not be able to, you shouldn't be impatient about jumping in and making your point, because that's not what it is about, right? And you should be a fan of watching something grow. You should be a fan of building something, because podcasts and its impact on your audience takes time to develop. Okay, fine. You decide that you want to be a podcaster. Then you quickly want to move on to what should you talk about, right? It's a really important question. And I think these are some of the questions I asked myself, right? What can you love long enough, right? In my own case, because of the work that I do in advertising and culture, I'm very, very lucky to be able to meet some extraordinary minds. Right? And my entire show is my effort to sort of capture those conversations, which I was anyways having with them in office rooms and in cafes over meals, into a form factor that has the ability to be there forever, right? In perpetuity. Right? That's my journey with the Filter Koffee podcast. So you need to be able to love something long enough. You need to be able to be selfish, right? Some of you might be thinking of creating something that is in line with your career, and it's a wonderful thing to do. To be able to complement what you do in your day job with something like a podcast that you've created, can take you places, right? It also something that we devalue a lot when you make the decision is how much time will you have, right? Podcasting requires time, right? Every episode needs to be thought through. In my case, I spend 2-3 hours at least every fortnight researching on the next episode, right? Researching on the next guest. Who is he? What kind of a person is he? How should I? What should I talk about? What should I not talk about? All of those, right? So time is very critical. And it's important also to figure, like in any decent startup, whether you're going to go alone or whether you're going to go with the co-founder slash co-host, right? And that will change the texture of what you're trying to do. And most importantly, I think you should have a point of view in terms of what you would like to be known for, right? What you would like your show to be known for. And I want to close with these learnings of mine in terms of trying to get it right. Right. You need to discover your flow once you started your show. I think your first episode is most likely to be your worst, right? Because you have this certain understanding, or rather, you have this certain idea of what your flow is, what your podcast will sound like. And believe me, your first episode will not sound anything like that, right? It is something that you discover, and it's a great joy. It's a great journey to take to sort of discover what is your rhythm, what is your show over time, and that is something that will definitely happen. You are asking your audience to invest something that is much, much, much more important than money, which is time, right? So you need to be extremely respectful of the conversation you're putting out, right? Every word that you're uttering, the duration of your show, all of this has to be, useful at some level. It has to be. It can be entertaining. It can be full of knowledge. But take that very seriously. Take the investment that your audience is making very, very seriously. Right? You should speak to your listeners a lot. Right? You'll always have people who love your show, and those might just be 5 or 6 of them. Those might be friends or family, and it's very easy to sort of ignore that, right? But some of my greatest feedback have come from the handful of listeners who really, really love my show, right? Don't worry about numbers. I think numbers is a different journey altogether. But take your loyal listeners most seriously. And get more people to sample it. I think word of mouth is extremely important, not just for individual shows, but overall for podcast as a medium. What I've realized is, unlike video, if you can get 100 people to sample podcasts, chances are definitely 20-25 of them will get hooked onto this, right? And that's a great number. Most people don't listen to podcasts because they don't know what it feels like. And important to understand that, ironically, I'm doing this in a show that talks about the art of podcasting, but it is so nascent as an art and as a science that there are literally no rules. Right? Nobody knows better. Right? Don't go by anybody's advice of it. You don't have to be deeply influenced by something that someone else tells you about your show. Right? Unless they're a listener, of course. So most people are at this point discovering this, right? So the point is, go with your gut, go with your convictions. Most people might not know better. Be obsessed about audio quality. Now, I'm an independent filmmaker, and there is a saying about independent filmmakers, right? Your first film will always have the worst audio, right? And people usually devalue the quality of audio, and the same thing is true for podcasts as well. We think that you can just do this over a phone. You can do this on speakerphone, which is all true. It's not that it's not true, but because podcasts are such an intimate experience, and because it is all about sensory experiences, take the quality of audio extremely seriously, right? As much as you take the content itself, it will only put you in good stead, right? It's not like somebody is going to come and tell you that, hey, I listened to your show, it had great audio quality. That's almost never going to happen. But it's an extremely important thing, Right? Think of it like great wicket keeping or great film editing. The better the person is at it, the more unnoticeable it will be. Right? But audio quality is very, very important. Um, and finally, we all sweat about the business of podcasting. Where do we want to make money? What are the monetization models of it, etc. Right? Before we go into that, let me talk a little bit about. Okay, fine. You've decided podcasts are for you. You answered all these questions. You know what you want to talk about, and you're using all of these learnings of podcasters in it. Now, how do you do it? Right? I think there are some shows which can be hosted by yourself. There are a lot of platforms today like Anchor and many others which you can use to sort of host your shows. And today there are beautiful platforms like ScrollStack where you can start your journey as a creator. Right, all of that is possible. Sometimes it is important that your show be done well. Right, it might need a fair bit of production, or maybe you might not really have the time, to produce it yourself, or you might not know how to do it. Right, in that case, you will certainly need a producer. Right, sometimes it's networks like IBM Podcasts or Avaz or Pratilipi. All of them, have some wonderful teams out there who can guide you, who will listen to you if you have a great idea for a show, and they can be your producers. In which case, they also part own your show. It's important to know that. So there is merits of looking at it as well. But if you look at what are the monetization models, right? I think largely there are three ways by which a podcast can be monetized. What I mean by programmatic is if you're listening to podcasts, chances are that you will hear the host say that, "Hey, we're taking a break. We'll be right back on the show." Right? And at that point, there is some sort of a commercial happening, and this commercial is like a typical ad break in television. Right? It's programmatic, and brands are able to put their communication in a systematic way there. Right? So usually the platform or the network which hosts the show tends to gain from that. So that's how you monetize. You can monetize this as an individual as well. The second part of it is to get someone to integrate, with your show. And in a way, both brand integrations and sponsorships, which is my third point, are sort of similar. You can even say they're the same thing. Globally, a lot of brands have built themselves on podcasts. Most notably, I would probably say Squarespace. It's a US brand. It's basically a tool you can use to build your websites. Was built entirely on their spending on podcasts. You will find some of the biggest podcast hosts talking about Squarespace in a very organic manner. And the thing about podcasts is when the host sort of talks about it in their own unique way, they're not talking brand speak, they're speaking their own language, then it's much, much more credible. Which is also why brand recall of brand integrations in podcasts, advertising in podcast have much, much higher recall than video ads, right? It's almost 5x, 6x more recall. It's important to know that, right? And I'll leave you with just 3 points, when it comes to the business of podcasting. The Gimlet acquisition of India has not happened yet. There's been no large acquisitions of that scale yet in India. Like I said earlier, in fiction, we are extremely under-leveraged. The serial moment for India has not happened yet, right? And what happened with Man Ki Baat, I'm not going so much into the content of it, but what happened with it and how it revived the fortunes of radio, right? Mainstream radio, that is. That moment has not happened in podcasts yet. So I'm provoking you with these statements because it's important for you to understand that is how early we are in our journey of podcasting in India, right? So, like I said earlier, there are no rules. So, feel free to break everything that you see. With that, I will shut up and let you ask your questions. Thank you so much.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Karthik. That was fantastic. I learned a lot. And also Terry Gross is absolutely my favorite as well. She is the reason why I started listening to podcasts as well. I first heard her on the radio and then
Of course.
figured
Yeah.
I need to dig into the archives of it as well. All right, so we've got questions coming. So without further ado, I'm going to jump straight into them. So Janvi Sen has asked a question that is very relevant to what you talked about last, which is about making money. She's asking straight away, how long does it take to make money by podcasting? She's assuming that you can make money from podcasting. So,
Well, you could probably make money from day one, right? I think if you have an extraordinary idea, that, like I said, you could get a brand to, to jump in on. It could be a money maker from day one, right? But typically, some of the shows that I've seen, where organically sponsors have come on board, they're all shows that have done about, at least 50 to 75 episodes. It has a certain rhythm to it, it has a certain recall, and a certain community around it. If you have to put a number to it.
got it. Understood. So the next question that Debarpan has asked, I think you've already answered that question and in fair detail, which is what are your favorite podcasts that you think everyone should give a listen to? So Debarpan, I hope you were making some notes when Karthik was going through slide by slide.
Yeah.
All right. So next question is by Ishan Bhatkoti. Ishan is somebody that I had in my previous avatar worked with briefly as well. So hey, hi Ishan, long time no speak. He's asking, where should I host my podcast?
Right. Just before I answer Ishan's question, in the previous one, I think one show that I listen to a lot, which is not there in what I spoke about, is 99% Invisible. Right. If you, like me, love trivia, like to go deeper on a subject, that's another show for you. Ishan, like I said, I think today I think Anchor seems to be a more popular platform to host podcasts, but there are really many platforms to do that. Right? Incidentally, while it might not have the glamour of podcasting, one of the simplest ways to create content and share it with everyone is actually still YouTube. Right? A lot of podcast hosts, their audience sort of listen to their show on YouTube because it's just easier for them to share it on WhatsApp with somebody else as well. Right? But Anchor is one, and today, there are organizations like Hubhopper and so many others. It's very easy for you to find a platform or a partner to sort of produce your show. Of course, the other way of doing it is to hit up one of the big producers like IBM or Avaz or anybody else and sort of get them to produce it for you.
Got it. Thanks, Karthik. And Ishan, you can also host them on ScrollStack because we support native audio. So if you are curious about it, get started. All right. So for everybody who's watching, please type your questions into the comment section of wherever you are watching this, and we will start to see your questions. So I'm going to sneak in one of my questions, Karthik, that I have for you, which is about podcasts in local Indian languages, right? So you also sort of brought this point up that there are some out there that are good, but I constantly struggle to find really good podcasts in local languages. I speak and sort of like read and listen to Hindi and Gujarati mainly, and there are some good ones, right? But you don't necessarily see the same variety, right? So, what is your take on it? There are certain categories that are super ripe for it, right? So fiction, as you talked about it, we've got great fiction in language, right? And we'll translate so well in Indian languages, but it doesn't happen. So, like, what is sort of like your take or your experiences in terms of Indian languages and podcasts?
Yeah, I think the biggest impact, for example, of a platform like ScrollStack will be in this space, right? Not just so much about languages, but about if it is whether it is a niche audience or whether it is a large audience. The ease of just doing that has just, the entry barrier has come down so much, right? So you don't have to worry about technology. It's already taken care of. The publishing platform, all of it is already there, right? In terms of areas of impact when it comes to regional content, I think one area where, like for example, if you take news content in India, one of the things that happened in the pandemic is that regional news has just gone through the roof. Regional news viewership has just gone through the roof, even on television. Right? I think news is going to get hyper local as we move forward, and community discussions on politics, on public policy, etc. All of these currently are crying out loud for non-Hindi, non-English sort of a discourse. Right? So I think that is certainly an area. With the wealth of books and literature that we have in Indian languages, Indic languages, I think fiction is an absolute no-brainer. Right? That is certainly that goes on around it. And to me, a thing that we actually devalue a lot, but I actually will bet my bottom dollar on it, is technology in local languages as well. Right? Today, when you talk of a technology show, it seems like it has to be in English. It's an unwritten rule. It's not even an empirically correct rule, right? Today, if you can create a tech show which is in an Indic language, I think it's such a green territory. You will find some wonderful sponsors to come on board, and you will find great audience for it as well.
Got it. And have you thought about doing anything in local languages, regional languages ever?
Oh yes, absolutely. It's in the works.
Oh, got it. Great.
Yeah,
All right.
yeah.
All right. So, looking forward to it, Karthik. The next question is from Sonal, who works closely with us. She's asking, do audiences prefer short 15-minute podcasts, or do they prefer longer ones?
So there is obviously fans of multiple different time frames. To me, my experience, and we've also empirically tested this with an Indian audience, around 40 minutes seems to be, the sweet spot, right? If you're looking at a bulk of the audience, right? Now, having said that, there is a show called Story of Origins, hosted by Deepa Gopalakrishnan, Chuck Gopal. And there is a show on words called Woody Woodpecker. These are all shows which are like 5-6 minutes. And they're wonderful consumption form factors as well, right? So there is a great merit in thinking extremely short. That way you can even do multiple episodes a week. It's good for stickiness for a show. But if you're the long form person, which most of us are as podcast hosts, then around 40 minutes seems to be a great time frame.
Got it. All right. The next question is by Karnika. She is asking, is there a Desi version of New York Times' Modern Love podcast?
Not that I have heard of, but that's a wonderful idea. There are a few podcasts on relationships and love that I absolutely love. But yeah, that's a wonderful idea right there.
What Karthik is saying is, with all your free time, you should definitely start one. All right. The next question is by Abhi Vijale. He is asking, how much research does a single episode takes on average, if you can quantify it?
I think it depends. Like for me, I would ideally like to spend about at least half a day researching an episode before I record it. I end up spending only about 2-3 hours. But if you go on to a show like told you, my most favorite show, which is Seen and the Unseen, Amit Verma, who's the host, he probably spends days, if not weeks, reading a book and researching a subject before he comes on show. Right? It also depends on the topic per se.
Got it. So I have another question that is sort of like relevant to sort of like podcast. But so I think right now today, all audio content is being titled as podcast, right? But there is so much more to audio, right? So like, it's how do you sort of like define that, or sort of like work around that, which is, and like what are your views in that, right? For example, podcast today, there is every time someone thinks about podcast, it's essentially when two people are talking to each other, or essentially two or more people are talking to each other. But there is such a wide space in terms of either it could be lessons over audio, or it could be other things like news, as you talked about, right? So there is this whole other world that may not have to be podcast, and also does not have to be delivered the same way, right? So how are you seeing that space evolve internationally, where India has sort of scope, or like have you thought about that and sort of like have a view on that?
Yeah, I have a view on a very strong view on the word podcasting itself. Right? We spoke about the history of it and all of that. But I also feel that it's a deterrent, right? Like, for example, it's extremely difficult for me to explain how this works, to my father and get him to listen to the show, because it seems like something that's very nerdy by nature. Isn't it? The moment you say podcasting, it seems like you need like high technology to be able to appreciate it. Right? I think if you look at the Indian market, right, the the English-speaking internet market in India probably tops off at probably 200 million people, right?
Yeah.
But the internet medium today in India is probably roughly around 500-600 million people, right? So there is a 60-70% of people who access the internet who are not exactly comfortable with English. And I'm not saying that they are not tech savvy. I'm actually saying the opposite of it. But it is important that we look at, if you're talking India, you look at this as a larger audio market and not, pigeonhole it into just people who have access to certain apps, right? So, to cut a very long story short, I feel the word podcasting itself might probably morph into something that is much more easily understandable. Like talk radio seems easily understandable. Audio is just best, right? But within that, uh, you know, what you're talking about in terms of should everything be plugged into the same bucket, etc. I think it has always been that, right? My favorite example is Comedy Central in the US. Right? Comedy Central really found a great cult audience as a podcast publisher, right? More than just later on what we saw on television, right? With the late night shows. So all kinds of content can become podcasts. I think comedy can be podcast. Conversations can be podcasting. I actually feel you should not define it in any one strict way. I think it should just democratize it.
Got it. Excellent. Thanks, Karthik. All right, let's go back to questions. We've got a few ones that we should get answered. So Vishal is asking an advertising related question. So he's asking, if a brand invests into advertising in the podcast, what should be the measurement parameters? Also, if you can state few advantages of advertising or integrating brand with a podcast.
I gave you, the example of Squarespace, which is a great example. There are some brands actually who have their own shows, right? Like if you take a brand like GE, the way they have integrated audio into their narrative is amazing, right? But coming back to advertising itself, what are the metrics that you should chase? I think I would largely say at two levels, right? One is, I think where podcast really works is in recall, right? And like I said at the beginning, there is a much higher 5x, 6x sort of higher recall for podcast advertising when you compare it with video advertising. Right? And so, what can you do with that sort of a recall? And if you look at the marketing funnel, it's a middle of the funnel sort of an impact, right? Consideration for a product is what you should look at, right? Podcasts, at least in India right now, will certainly not have the reach that you will have in a medium like video, right? So you probably are not doing it right if you're looking at podcasts as a reach medium. But podcast as a consideration medium, podcast as a targeting medium, I think that can be extremely useful in India. And if you take brands like Intel, or brands like, for example, HDFC. They've all been some of the early adopters of podcast advertising in India.
Got it. And Karthik, Ravi Shekhar Veenam is asking a very related question, which is, do you know like how many people listen to podcasts in India versus the US? And also, he's wondering if it can be a medium to reach common people around India.
Yeah, I think there was a few years back a KPMG report which put that number at around 40, 50 million people. I don't think that is accurate, right? From and the thing is, this is an estimation, right? This is more of a triangulation, where you look at the kind of numbers that platforms are claiming, and then look at the kind of numbers that you're seeing on a per show basis, etc. If you sort of do that, my guess is, I think it's safe to say, as we speak today, if you have to listen, if you have to define a podcast listener as someone who's listened to an episode at least once in the last 30 days, then we are probably looking at a number that is around 25 million people, 25 to 30 million people in India.
Got it. So that's still pretty big then. It's not small by any means.
To put it in perspective, 25, 30 million people is probably where Facebook was in 2015 or 2014. Yeah.
Got it. Makes sense. Great. All right. So we are over time. So I think we'll take the last question and then we'll wrap up. Inakshi Bishwas, hi Inakshi, is also asking, is non-fiction and autobiographical content more popular than fictional works that are adapted as part of storytelling?
I don't necessarily know if you can use the word more popular, then it becomes a very, very quantitative sort of a commentary. But I'm translating audio biographical content as where the person is talking about himself, right? And that I see a lot of today, right? Like myself, my dreams, where I'm going through. It's almost like a live feed of your life, right? There is also this joke that there are some people who choose podcasting instead of therapy. That is also prevalent. But jokes aside, I think non-fiction content is certainly more prevalent. I'll probably use that. More podcasters sort of find it easier to talk about, right? Talk about an area of expertise, right? Because they also look at it as a self-promotion thing. But I think when you look at it from the listener's perspective, and I'll already said this thrice, I'll say it again and again. I think fiction is extremely underleveraged. There's a lot more that we can do with fiction than we are doing today.
Got it. Excellent. So with that, thank you so much, Karthik, for your time. I'm sure you've inspired a lot of people to either get their journey on podcasting started or get their audio content out there. For those who are not sure of a platform, feel free to use ScrollStack as well. People are also asking for information to sort of like how can they reach out to you. So we'll at least paste the link to the Filter Koffee podcast in sort of like the comments, or Karthik, if you want to give out your email ID.
It's _Karthik, not very imaginative, on Twitter. And it is filter_coffee. It's coffee with a K on Instagram.
Excellent. Great stuff. And thank you everybody for joining. See you guys next week with a different topic, with a different creator. So till then, everybody have a great week. Thanks again, Karthik, for your time, and see you soon.
Thank you so much. Cheers.
Thanks a lot. Bye, everybody.